The wheels of my suitcase clicked in defiance against the cold marble, echoing louder than Andrew's voice ever did when he claimed to love me. My hands were steady, unshakably so, as they gripped the handle, though inside something was cracking, not breaking. Cracking, like ice underfoot, fracturing with each step I took away from the woman I had been pretending to be. Behind me, Andrew's voice rose like a spoiled crescendo, arrogant and wounded all at once. "You'll be nothing without my name, Claire." I paused at the threshold, turning just enough to see his silhouette standing beneath the vaulted ceilings I helped pay for, in the apartment my equity portfolio helped renovate, in a marriage I bled my ambition dry to sustain. He looked ridiculous in his pressed shirt and tailored rage, lips curled with entitlement. Somewhere deep in his expression was a flicker of disbelief, not that I was leaving, but that I was capable of leaving at all. My gaze drifted upward as the door groaned shut behind me. The chandelier above me trembled when the door slammed. The same chandelier I paid for. 8 years ago, I would have cried. Not because I was scared to leave, but because I was ashamed it took me so long to even consider it. But today, I felt nothing. And that terrified Andrew more than any tear I could have shed. The doorman called a car, I didn't say goodbye. The elevator ride down from the 43rd floor was silent, but in my head everything screamed. Screamed with every suppressed idea I shelved for his legacy. Screamed with every board seat I declined so I could attend another Whitmore Foundation gala. Screamed with every pregnancy test that came back negative while he blamed me under his breath but never in public. By the time the brass doors opened onto the lobby, the silence inside me had settled into something calm. Final, like the stillness before a verdict is read. I stepped into the car Madison had arranged, because of course she had. She sent me the same text every Thursday for 6 months. "You ready yet?" Today I was. As the car pulled away from the curb, Andrew called. Again, third call in 5 minutes. I turned the screen face down. I knew the stages: denial, negotiation, wrath, pity, panic. Men like Andrew didn't grieve. They spun. They called lawyers. They called publicists. They called their mothers. I let him spin. Let the name Whitmore twist itself into knots without me, because here's what Andrew never understood: I never needed his name. He needed mine, he just never bothered to ask what it was. And now I was finally remembering it myself. I didn't quit because I couldn't compete. I quit because I believed in us. That was my mistake. Back then, I wasn't just Claire Whitmore, someone's wife. I was Claire Adams, the youngest VP BlackRock had promoted in over a decade. I'd landed billion-dollar portfolios before I turned 30. My name carried weight in conference rooms full of men twice my age who couldn't look me in the eye without adjusting their ties. I remember the day I got the call, Andrew pacing in the Detroit office of his father's company, the weight of generational failure breathing down his neck. "My father's stepping down," he told me. "If I don't turn things around, Whitmore Industries dies with me." I should have paused, should have asked more questions, but I heard the panic in his voice and I loved him. God, that sounds pathetic now. I flew back from Hong Kong that week and handed in my resignation 2 days later. My managing director called me insane. He didn't even ask if I was pregnant, he assumed it. Said it with that smug smirk people reserve for women who walk away from power. I told him I was investing in a different kind of future. I actually believed that. Detroit was cold in every way I hadn't prepared for. I traded glass towers for factories that smelled like rust and failure. I poured myself into Andrew's world, restructured divisions, renegotiated debt, even quietly lobbied a senator I went to grad school with for clean energy grants. I stayed off the payroll on purpose. Because Andrew said it would look better to the board if he was the face of the turnaround, and I let him. I let him take credit for every late night I spent running models on our kitchen table. I told myself it didn't matter whose name was on the slides, as long as we were building something together, except we were. We weren't building anything. I was propping something up and he was repainting the outside to make it look new. Madison called it 5 years ago. "Claire, you didn't marry a partner, you married a mascot for old money trying to stay relevant." I didn't want to hear it. I was still making excuses for the dinners where he interrupted me, for the investor meetings where I wasn't invited, for the way he always introduced me as his brilliant wife, but never actually listened to a word I said in public. He'd kiss my cheek and dismiss my brain in the same breath, and I let him. But the breaking point wasn't dramatic. It was a Tuesday. I asked Andrew how the quarterly earnings looked and he said, "Let the finance guys handle that, babe." Just like that, babe. As if I hadn't once managed 10 times his capital in my sleep. I looked at him that night across our dining room table, his cufflinks reflecting candlelight, his posture perfect, his ego louder than the jazz in the background, and I felt something dangerous: boredom, not anger, not heartbreak. Just the bone-deep boredom of someone who finally realizes she's been sleepwalking through her own life. I started packing 2 weeks later, in silence, and I didn't say a word until the suitcase touched marble, because I didn't quit because I couldn't compete. I quit because I believed in us, but Andrew Whitmore never believed in me. It didn't happen all at once. It was gradual, like a house sinking into its own foundation. A shift so subtle you don't notice the cracks until the roof caves in. I used to think emotional abuse had to be loud, explosive, but what Andrew and his world did to me wasn't violence. It was erosion, polite, decorated, dressed in cufflinks and Chardonnay. The first time it stung was small. We were at a holiday fundraiser for the Whitmore Foundation. A hedge fund director's wife asked what I did. Before I could open my mouth, Andrew laughed and said, Claire, oh, she keeps the house standing. I get the boardroom, she gets the living room. Everyone chuckled. I smiled. I smiled even though 2 nights earlier I'd restructured their overseas logistics deal to save them $3.2 million in Q4, but I didn't say that. I didn't say anything. That became a pattern. The tighter I clung to logic, the more irrational I felt. I'd whisper strategy over dinner, you're over-leveraged here, bring in green tech to stabilize the supply chain, and 3 weeks later he'd present the plan like it came to him in a dream. The press called him visionary, I wasn't even in the article, and then there were the meetings I wasn't invited to. Optics, he'd say, too many women in the room and they'll start talking diversity instead of delivery. He thought that was a compliment. Eleanor was no better, she'd smile like a debutante, ice polished in pearls, but her words were razors. Oh Claire, you've been so supportive, Andrew really thrives when you're behind him. Behind him, always behind, never beside, never ahead. One Thanksgiving, she handed me a folded place card with my name in soft gold script. It read Claire Whitmore support role. She said it was a joke, but I still have it in a box. Like an autopsy photo of my own self-worth, the worst part wasn't the public erasure, it was the private gaslighting, the way Andrew made me feel crazy for noticing I was disappearing. Why does everything have to be a power play with you? Isn't it enough that I brag about you to my friends? You're lucky you don't have to work, most women would kill for this life. He said those things with a smile. The kind of smile that dares you to ruin dinner by pushing back. And I didn't, not then, because I had convinced myself that love meant compromise, that maturity meant shrinking a little so the relationship could breathe. But somewhere along the line, I wasn't compromising, I was dissolving. They didn't erase me in one stroke, they did it by inches, applause for Andrew, silence for me. They made me feel like the architect of my own invisibility. And the worst part, for a long time they saw what I let them see. The pearls, the tasteful smile, the way I leaned in during cocktail parties as if Andrew's ideas were something new to me. I played the perfect wife like it was theater because it was. And while they applauded his monologues, I built an empire in the wings with my maiden name stitched into its bones. Adams Capital Holdings, formed in silence, shielded in shadows. Not even Madison knew the full scope. Not then. I started it 3 months after Andrew forgot to credit me for securing the Whitmore Harper supply contract, a deal I handed him over dinner with napkin notes and a color-coded timeline. That night, I stared at the city skyline while he took a congratulatory call on the balcony. I opened a separate laptop, created a Wyoming LLC, and transferred $250,000 from my trust fund into its first account. That was the beginning. Adams Capital grew quietly. Shell companies inside shell companies, an intricate puzzle of holding firms that would confuse most attorneys unless they knew exactly where to look. And no one did. Because the woman smiling politely at Whitmore galas, dressed in ivory silk and silence, didn't seem like someone capable of structuring cross-market arbitrage strategies or leveraging disjointed logistics firms into competitive weapons. But she always was. Within 4 years, I acquired 4 properties in Miami, all under different shell names, all rented to high-end development firms with triple net leases. 20% ownership in 3 competing logistics firms in the Midwest, small enough not to raise alarms, coordinated enough to drive regional pricing when nudged. And my quietest move, a silent equity stake in green tech solutions back when Madison's board needed early capital but couldn't afford VC vultures. She never knew the money came from me. It was funneled through a West Coast family office I formed under my great-grandmother's surname. I never asked for control, only confidentiality and the right to increase my share before any public offer, which I did. So when Andrew's team started sniffing around green tech last quarter, bragging that Whitmore Industries was preparing for a strategic acquisition to modernize its fleet, I smiled. Because Andrew wasn't just walking into a merger, he was walking into my merger. They thought I'd been sleeping, that I traded my mind for marble countertops and museum memberships, but I never stopped building, I just learned to do it quietly. Every holiday dinner, every boardroom I was left out of, every eye roll from a leaner, every snide, supportive wife comment, each one bought me time, gave me cover, gave me motive. I didn't need a seat at Andrew's table, I owned the house next door, and the deed had my name on it, Adams, not Whitmore. I used to think walking away from BlackRock was a sacrifice. It was a pivot, because while they mistook me for decoration, I was laying bricks. Now they're about to realize just how many walls I built and how many doors only I hold the keys to. The call came at 6:42 a.m. My phone buzzed once, twice, then again with a text I will never forget. Your father's in the ICU, massive stroke, he's asking for you. My fingers went numb. I read the words twice, maybe 3 times, before I could even move. I was already halfway down the hallway when I realized I hadn't put on shoes. The kettle was hissing in the kitchen, steam swirling in that perfect suburban stillness Andrew loved so much. No mess, no chaos, no inconvenient human emotion. He was at the counter reviewing some glossy pages from the latest pitch deck, perfectly groomed at dawn like nothing could ever touch him. I opened my mouth and said the words that nearly broke me. Andrew, it's my dad. He's in the hospital. It's bad. I need to fly to Ohio. Now. He didn't even look up, just flipped a page. Babe, I've got the green tech guys coming in at 9. Can you fly out tomorrow? I blinked. I wasn't sure I'd heard him correctly. Tomorrow? He might not have a tomorrow. Andrew sighed like I was overreacting, like this was about some PTA fundraiser gone wrong. Then he finally looked at me, eyes calculating, jaw tight. Claire, it's a merger worth 90 million. Do you understand that? This changes everything for Whitmore Industries. He took a step closer, placed a hand on my arm like it was supposed to anchor me. Your dad's tough, he'll pull through, I need you here. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't loud or sudden, it was quiet, internal, like a seam giving way after being stretched too far for too long. My father wasn't just a man to me, he was the one who taught me how to file taxes before prom. Who drove me to Harvard with nothing but a thermos of coffee and 3 taped up boxes, who told me through every failure there's dignity in showing up even when no one claps. And Andrew, my husband, was asking me to trade that for a deal he didn't even know I'd already outmaneuvered. I looked at his hand on my arm, perfectly manicured, possessive, and I felt nothing but rage, not the explosive kind. The kind that simmers, focused and surgical. I stepped back, quietly, carefully, like someone putting down a final chess piece. I'll send you the financial models we drafted last quarter, I said, voice flat. You won't need me today, his brow furrowed. But I didn't answer. I was already pulling on my coat. At the airport, I sat alone by gate 19, watching the snow fall outside. I hadn't cried, not yet. But I knew something had ended, not my marriage, it had already rotted beyond repair. What ended was my tolerance. I boarded the plane to Ohio with nothing but a duffel bag and a USB drive. Inside that drive, every quiet move I'd ever made under the name Adams, and every piece of leverage I would need not just to leave Andrew, but to burn down the castle he thought he ruled. The hotel room was quiet, sterile, bland carpet, floral drapes, a Bible in the drawer that still smelled like detergent. My father lay unconscious 3 floors below, tethered to machines that beeped in slow rhythm like a countdown I wasn't ready for. But tonight I wasn't mourning. I was calculating. I opened my laptop, connected to the secure server, and pulled up the merger packet Andrew had been so desperate to finalize. His life-changing $90 million acquisition of green tech. I'd brokered it, I built it, and he didn't even know. 6 months ago, Madison called me. She was frustrated. Her board wanted expansion but didn't want to dilute control with new investors. Green tech needed infrastructure, capital, and a strong logistics backbone. Andrew needed a miracle to salvage Whitmore's outdated fleet and failing margins. I needed leverage. So I proposed the solution. Quietly, I told Madison, let Whitmore think he's winning. We'll write the deal so his ego stays intact, but we'll hold the leash. And she laughed, that dry, wicked laugh I hadn't heard since college. God, I missed you. We drafted the merger through a neutral intermediary firm, technically a Boston-based third party Andrew thought he discovered through a contact at Deloitte. He was too arrogant to question the details, too fixated on beating his father's legacy to notice that the entire structure was bait. The financing came through Adams Capital, my capital, funneled discreetly through 3 staggered shell entities matched with an anonymous venture guarantee tied to Green Tech Series C funding. Not a single clause bore my name, but every decision bore my fingerprint and the contract. It wasn't just a handshake and champagne, it was a loaded weapon. The merger agreement included 2 special terms I insisted on. A performance clause: Whitmore Industries must meet specific operational KPIs within 12 months post-merger, including fleet efficiency, digitization benchmarks, and cost reduction metrics. Failure to meet those thresholds would trigger full equity reassessment. A poison pill provision: if Whitmore's leadership fails to comply with transparency audits or breaches operational terms. Even once, Green Tech reserves the right to reclaim strategic assets and initiate forced divestiture of shares at 30% original valuation. Andrew signed it. Never read past the executive summary. He thought he'd negotiated dominance. He never realized he'd agreed to conditions that made his company a time bomb. He never thought the wife he dismissed would be the one lighting the fuse. I closed the laptop and leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly overhead. Andrew still thought the deal was days from closing. He didn't know it had already closed under my terms. He didn't know Green Tech's board had already reviewed the compliance logs and flagged his team's falsified projections. And he definitely didn't know the first poison pill trigger was about to be pulled. All I had to do was whisper to Madison, and Andrew Whitmore would find himself holding a company that suddenly wasn't his. The sound of his footsteps echoed before he appeared, heavy, impatient, designer soles slapping linoleum like they had somewhere more important to be. Andrew Whitmore, in all his hand-stitched mid-level power, stormed through the double doors like this was his boardroom. He spotted me immediately, sitting beside the vending machine, still in yesterday's coat, eyes sunken from sleep I hadn't got. Claire, he barked. Why the hell haven't you answered your phone? I didn't flinch, I didn't even stand. I just looked at him like he was a late delivery, annoying, expected, irrelevant. My father's in a coma, I said evenly. You had nothing to say I wanted to hear. His jaw ticked. You can't just disappear. We're in the middle of finalizing the green tech deal. I cut him off with a raised hand, and for the first time in our marriage, he actually stopped speaking. I'm not disappearing, Andrew, I said. I'm watching you scramble to finish a deal you don't even understand. He blinked, confused. The way men get when the person they underestimate begins using full sentences. What are you talking about? He snapped. I stood slowly, brushing lint from my lap like it mattered. I'm talking about the fact that I own the debt financing your merger, that the bridge capital came from Adams Capital Holdings, that I've been funding green tech through a layered shell structure for 3 years. He blinked again, slower this time. That's impossible. I know, I said softly, stepping closer. You just didn't look because you never saw me as anything other than your supportive, silent wife. You never asked where I was going, what I was reading, who I was meeting. You never thought I had the mind, the connections, the audacity. But you married into my name, he muttered, like a child reaching for a rule book that's already burned. I leaned in, my voice so calm it made him flinch. And you just signed over controlling interest in your legacy to a woman who doesn't even share your last name anymore on paper or in principle. Andrew's face flushed with something I'd never seen before, not anger, not entitlement, fear. It lasted only a second before he masked it behind that brittle smirk. You're bluffing. I smiled, not sweetly, not softly. The kind of smile you give someone when you finally stop hiding. Check the fine print of your term sheet, I whispered. Specifically page 9, clause 14, the moment you breached KPI compliance last quarter when your COO falsified the CapEx report, you triggered the poison pill. His breath caught. I just sent Madison the confirmation, I added, stepping back. Your merger is still going through. But the board will be welcoming a new controlling partner. Me? Silence, except for the ventilator hissing down the hall like punctuation. Andrew stood there, lips parted, heartbeat pounding behind his temples. I walked past him without another glance, pausing just long enough at the door to say it. You didn't build this, Andrew. You were just holding the hammer while I drew the blueprint. The windows in my new office stretched from floor to ceiling, the glass so clear it made Central Park feel like it belonged to me. The air smelled like eucalyptus and new leather. My assistant had just dropped off fresh espresso, and Madison's latest update was glowing on my screen. Green Tech had just secured a federal logistics contract worth $120 million. I didn't flinch. I didn't cheer. I'd already moved past celebration. Now I was studying the aftershocks. Andrew's empire wasn't crumbling, it was evaporating. It started with the vendors. 3 of Whitmore's top materials suppliers, firms that had worked with the company since his grandfather's day, pulled their contracts. One cited instability in leadership. Another cited pending financial reassessment. The third quietly transitioned all their business to a firm housed under one of my subsidiaries. Then the clients, longtime partners, began reallocating, moving their accounts to more future-ready partners. One by one they walked. They didn't even wait for the merger's official realignment. Some of them didn't even give notice. But what truly gutted Andrew, what drained the color from his face, was the staff. Whitmore Industries employees weren't loyal to a name. They were loyal to stability, to vision, to leadership. So when I made quiet offers, competitive salaries, remote options, stock incentives, they left, not in mass exodus but in deliberate departures. Engineers, ops leads, the head of internal logistics, even his executive assistant Michelle, she left a sticky note on his desk. Thank you for the mentorship, I'll be joining Eastward Collective. Claire offered me something you never did respect. Eastward Collective was mine. One of 6 entities beneath Adams Capital, all staffed now with Andrew's former lifelines. He called me 5 times in 2 days. I ignored the first 4. On the 5th, I picked up. His voice had changed. No edge, no bluster, just exhaustion and a tremor he couldn't mask. Claire, I don't know what you want from me. I let silence settle, let him feel it. Finally, I said, I want nothing, Andrew, that's the point. But you've dismantled everything, you've taken everything. No, I said gently, I didn't take it. You handed it to me piece by piece every time you dismissed me, every time you took credit for something I built. His voice cracked. I need help, I'm bleeding, this company's dying, Claire. I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. I know, more silence. Then a question, hesitant, raw. Would you consider coming back, consulting? Even part-time? That was when I opened the drawer of my sleek walnut desk and pulled out the envelope. Inside, an official offer letter. I anticipated this, I said. There's a role available, junior account executive. You'd work under a woman named Priya. She's 28, sharp, direct. You'd report to her. He was silent. Base salary is $48,000, I added. Commission structure based on performance, no equity. You're joking, I smiled slowly. No, Andrew, I'm offering you what you always thought I was worth. There was a click, he hung up, I didn't call him back. Later that night, I stood by the window, watching the city flicker alive beneath me. Somewhere across town, Andrew was probably sitting in that sterile boardroom of his, trying to understand how everything slipped through his fingers. But it didn't slip. He lost it the moment he mistook silence for weakness. He lost it when he chose pride over partnership. I sipped my espresso and exhaled slowly, not in triumph, not in cruelty, just relief, because I wasn't his wife anymore. I wasn't his strategy, I wasn't his anything. I was me again, finally, and everything I'd reclaimed, it was mine to begin with. The water is quiet in the mornings. It laps gently against the stone shore, reflecting a sky so wide it feels like freedom. My coffee steams in the early chill, and for the first time in over a decade, I breathe without calculation. No merger to negotiate, no ego to tiptoe around, just pine trees, glass walls, and peace that doesn't need proving. My lakefront estate wasn't bought for status. It was built for solitude. A modern minimalist haven in upstate New York, floor-to-ceiling windows, hand-poured concrete, and one long cedar hallway that creaks in the wind like an old memory letting go. This is the life I chose, deliberately, and now I build from it, not for someone else's legacy but for mine. We launched the Whitmore Women's Fund last spring. I kept the name, not as a tribute to Andrew but as a reclamation. Let the world watch it transform. It's a $100 million initiative, born from my own capital and matched by a coalition of institutional partners who once ignored women like me. Strategic, relentless, and done waiting for permission. This fund is for the underestimated, for women with garage-born ideas and boardroom-sized ambition, for those labeled too emotional or too aggressive in rooms where men were simply seen as passionate or confident. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Applications poured in faster than our team could sort them. I still remember one woman, 8 months pregnant, who walked into her pitch meeting calm and prepared and walked out with $2.5 million in seed funding and full childcare coverage built into her contract. Another wept after we called her CEO instead of sweetheart, the first time anyone had, and in each of them I saw pieces of myself. The girl who shrank her brilliance to stay palatable. The woman who learned to smile through being talked over. The earlier me before I learned how to weaponize stillness, how to sit in power without needing to explain it. Now I get to pass on the tools I didn't have and then step aside and watch them build. But the most meaningful moment didn't happen in a pitch room or a magazine profile. It happened in Ohio in front of a red brick hospital where the windows still stick when it's humid. My father had a stroke last year. The recovery has been slow, but when I showed him the press release about the fund, he managed 2 words through cracked speech. You did, I nodded. We both knew what he meant. Last fall, the Richard Adams wing broke ground, a $20 million donation in his honor. It's equipped with leading-edge stroke recovery technology, therapy suites, and a library with floor-to-ceiling windows for families to sit, read, and breathe. It's a space for healing, for clarity, for remembering who you are, because legacy isn't about being remembered everywhere, it's about being remembered in the places that shaped you. And I've never forgotten where I came from. No press, no gala. Just a bronze plaque near the main entrance that reads, "For the man who taught me quiet strength." Some nights I still think about the woman I used to be, how I traded my name for someone else's, how I let love become labor, how I confused silence for devotion. But then I walk through my home, barefoot on stone floors, passing shelves lined with books I finally had time to read, blueprints for ideas I now build on my own terms. And I remember I didn't lose myself. I buried her for a while now. She's back, sharper, quieter, unshakable. They say revenge is best served cold. I disagree. It's best served calm, with clean hands, steady breath, and no need to look back. A year has passed since I lit the final match. And in that time, the world recalibrated, not around Andrew Whitmore's name, but around mine. He's in Phoenix now, freelancing mostly. Consulting for mid-size manufacturers and trying to stay relevant on LinkedIn with articles about resilience and adaptive leadership. I scroll past them sometimes, I don't even click. Madison sent me a photo last week, Andrew in a borrowed suit standing stiffly behind a trade show booth, handing out flyers like a college intern. His tie looked crooked, his smile strained. And yet he still wore that same expensive watch, the one he used to rest so casually on boardroom tables, waiting for admiration. He still carried himself like a man convinced the world owed him applause. But the rooms he once commanded, they no longer echo his name, they remember mine. Adams Capital Holdings, my firm, my vision, has been featured in Forbes, Bloomberg, and Fast Company as one of the most inclusive and forward-thinking investment firms in America. Not just because we fund women, not just because we prioritize community equity over extraction, but because we understand something most of Wall Street still refuses to learn: confidence is not competence. We invest in founders who have been underestimated, overlooked, or outright dismissed, especially those who have heard no so often it became a second language. We help them translate that rejection into something stronger, into capital, into conviction, into companies that mean something, companies that endure, companies that outlast the men who once laughed at them. People sometimes ask me if I miss the life I had with Andrew, the penthouse apartment, the designer dinners, the social invitations, the illusion of prestige. The truth, I don't, because it was never really my life. It was a role I played on a borrowed stage, and I was never meant to be someone else's backdrop. Today, I write my own scripts, I direct them, I fund them. And I never cast men who treat me like set dressing. On my desk, there's a photograph I look at every morning. It's of me and my father, taken years ago on the sidewalk outside my freshman dorm at Harvard. He's in his worn corduroy jacket, I'm clutching a duffel bag and 3 textbooks. Neither of us is smiling, we're both squinting into the late afternoon sun. I don't keep it for nostalgia, I keep it for clarity. That girl, the one in the photo, didn't become powerful. She didn't transform into someone new. She always was powerful, always capable. She just forgot for a little while, got distracted by someone else's spotlight, but she's back now. And this time the stage is hers.